Hi, I'm Yolanda and this is Speak On. Today we're talking WAP, 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 macaroni in a pot. Cardi, Megan, Foxy, Kim, Kia, Colby Calais, Liz Phair and many more female artists have made songs about vaginas that have the conservatives clutching their pearls while the rest of us head to the dance floor. We love it, we know how to use it, or we eventually learn to, but what do we really know about that WAP? Women have been neglected by medical science because, well, patriarchy realness. Our symptoms are ignored and health problems specific to us are massively under-researched, not just historically, but right now. An article in The Guardian in 2019 highlighted that less than 2.5% of publicly funded research is dedicated solely to reproductive health, which is crazy because 1 in 3 women in the UK will suffer from a reproductive or gynecological health problem. We need to learn a lot more about our pussies so we can learn about, how to look after them because no one else is. So today we're going to talk about pelvic floor health and I'm joined by the awesome Grace Lillywhite so we can learn how to keep that popping and how to look after ourselves. Grace is the owner of Centred Mums, which run pregnancy and postnatal wellbeing programs that support women throughout their motherhood journey. Welcome, Grace. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I loved your intro. That was great. It was much more exciting than the kind of thing I usually say.
Well, I think so many songs about it. I was actually going to start incorporating lyrics, but I was like, no, that would take too long. So can you tell me a little bit more about Centred Mums?
So I started Centred Mums 2 years ago. I've been teaching Pilates for 10 years now, and especially in pre and postnatal Pilates for 9 years. But I've been was doing lots of different kinds of Pilates. And then a couple of years ago, I decided that actually what I'm really passionate about is supporting women, and particularly women who've had problems with their pelvic floors, with their abdominal separation, and during pregnancy, postnatal period is often a time when that can happen. Although for today, I did want to focus and flag that pelvic floor dysfunction isn't specifically just for women who've had babies. Often it's seen as something that only happens to people who when they've had a baby, but that's not necessarily the case. It is more common, but I did want to flag that it is also a normal thing for, and we'll talk a bit more later, I think, about exercise and what kind of exercise can help your pelvic floor and exercise that maybe isn't so helpful for it. So, and there's people like gymnasts, runners, often, or not often necessarily, but can have issues even if they haven't had babies. Yeah, so all women need to be conscious of how their pelvic floor is functioning, and I really wish it was taught in schools, because I think that it's not about not doing things, it's about understanding what you're doing. Often there's a bit of, there's a kind of sort of scare factors around things, particularly in the pre and postnatal period. It's never that you shouldn't be doing certain exercises, it's that you should be making sure you're ready to do those exercises. And for the people who are running, who haven't had children and have pelvic floor dysfunction, there's loads you can do to support it, and that's kind of what I'm really passionate about, letting people know that a bit of leaking isn't normal. It's something that you can do loads about. And often when it comes to, unfortunately, like you said, medically we're not really supported enough, and there's often people are kind of encouraged just to accept it, and then all of a sudden people need massive surgeries to help get them back to some level of normality, when actually if they'd have known a bit more, they could possibly have prevented that.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. We're definitely going to get into it. So I think first things first, what is a pelvic floor and what does it do?
So your pelvic floor is the base of all of the muscles. But often we talk about the core, and the core kind of runs from the base of your pelvis up to your diaphragm, and that whole area is supported by your pelvic floor. So it's under it. It's in the base of your pelvis, and it stretches a bit like a hammock from your pubic bone at the front to your tailbone at the back, and from sit bone to sit bone. So it's this little kind of base of support, which is why, and babies come through the pelvic floor when they're born, which is why women, or when they're born vaginally, which is why women need to know about it if they're having a baby. But I do believe that everyone should know about it, because it's something that even if you're not if you're not in the, you know, having babies or wanting to have babies, knowing our bodies is always a good thing, and understanding what we're doing with our bodies is always a good thing. And I think pelvic floor health is just quite a taboo subject that, you know, often people come to my pregnancy class having not even really knowing what their pelvic floor is. And there was a study recently that showed that something like 50% of women couldn't name all of the different bits of their anatomy down in the pelvic, you know, couldn't name the clitoris and the vagina and the urethra. And when I saw that, I was just like, oh my God, we need to be doing more to help people understand their bodies, because it matters. And there's a link between pelvic floor dysfunction and postnatal depression, because it's such a huge thing. You know, if you can't move around without wetting yourself, that's a big deal. And also, you know, people also experience fecal incontinence, and it's awful. It's a really, really difficult thing to go through, and it's something that I really want to encourage women to be open with, you know, especially for the people that can help and can, you know, there's something called a pelvic health physio, which works on supporting your pelvic floor and, you know, can check your pelvic floor. And a lot of people don't even know that they exist, and they live with these symptoms, not knowing that there are people that are specifically trained to help them. So,
because then don't they have those in? I remember reading an article of what this was years and years ago, and a journalist who writes for The Guardian, she had children here, and then she moved to France, and then she had 2 children here and 2 children there, and she talked about how different the experience was, because they are really on top of like that pelvic floor health. When she'd had her baby, she was immediately booked in for these sessions to have straight after having given birth vaginally, to then actually like sort out and look at and rehab her pelvic floor. Why don't they do that here?
I don't know. I wish I knew the answer. I think it's money, but actually I believe that they would save a lot of money by doing that, because it would, in the longer term, it would mean that so many people avoided issues in the future. And I think that it's, you know, I really encourage my clients when they've had their babies to go and see a pelvic health physio, even if they don't have any dysfunction that is obvious, you know, even if they're not leaking and so on, because it's really good to know and understand what's happening in your pelvic floor. For example, there's often a really big focus on strengthening the pelvic floor, and, you know, you get told to do lift and squeeze exercises, which can be an important part of pelvic floor health, you know, when you've had a baby, but it's not just about that. And as an example, when I had my first baby, I went to see a pelvic health physio afterwards and was told that there was quite a bit of tension in my pelvic floor, which they then released, and I could literally feel when I came out how much better a contraction I could get having then released the tension, because you can't strengthen a muscle that's tight. When something's really tight and stuck together, when you then try and contract it, the contraction doesn't happen properly because that tension gets in the way. So one of the big key tips that I give to people about doing their pelvic floor exercises is to make sure that you're releasing as much as you're contracting, and making sure that that is doable, because sometimes some people can't really release it. It's just so stuck, and then that's when you can bring exercises into it to help with, you know, improving that sense of release.
Yeah. I think, like, let's dial it back a little bit. Like, why are you so passionate about this, like, about pelvic floor, like health in particular? Because it sounds like you've done, I mean, I've looked at your site, you are so qualified, and you've been talking about this and doing all of this for years. So what started you on that journey?
It was just a coincidence that I got into pre and postnatal work. I went and during my Pilates training, I wasn't very well trained in pre and postnatal, and then I went out to work in Pilates studios around London, and I was finding that I had a lot of pre and postnatal women coming in, and I didn't feel totally confident. So I went and did my first pre and postnatal specialist training, and I don't know why, because I was like 25, didn't care about babies or anything like that, but I just went and I did the first course that I did, and I just was really fascinated by it. I think that like women's bodies are just so amazing, and I just became pretty hooked from there. So when I started working with pre and postnatal women, I then, the pelvic floor became more important within my work. But then over the last few years, I've started to get a lot of clients who aren't necessarily newly pre and postnatal. So I have a lot of people whose kids are maybe 5 and they've not really had a chance to look after themselves until the kids start school. And then, once the kids are in school and they get a bit more time and a bit more headspace, they then realise that they want to sort their bodies out a little bit. So I get people that have, with 5-year-olds who've been running and doing boot camp classes and things, but come to me saying, everything's fine, but I am leaking a little bit when I do this, which then to me is an immediate, like, right, okay, your pelvic floor needs some work. And yes, it's just really the reason I've become so bothered about it is mostly because of how many people I know have problems with it and don't talk about it. And then, my own experience, I had a prolapse after my first baby, which came not actually from the birth, but from holding her constantly and, not looking after myself well enough, I think. And so, I'm just, I've managed to, with the work that I do and the, what I know, I'm lucky that I haven't had a lot of problems because of the prolapse. But I do think that a lot of people, if I didn't know what I know, I would have been doing all kinds of things that would not be helping and would, in the long term, lead to problems.
Can you just explain, because some people might not know what a prolapse is?
Yes. So a prolapse is when one or more of your organs in the pelvis slips down from the normal position and bulges into the vagina. So it can be the womb, the bowel, the bladder, or the top of the vagina. And basically where you've got kind of the hole, if you don't have enough support, and it's often seen as a pelvic floor issue, but actually prolapse is a fascial issue, which means that, so fascia is the connective tissue that runs through your whole body. And so, for example, if you spend a lot of time slouching, you kind of push your fascia down. So then if you don't have enough support from your pelvic floor and you've got that sense of pushing down all the time, then things can start to basically, find a way out, and that way out is your vagina. And it sounds really scary.
It does.
It doesn't, a lot of, it doesn't cause any, it can cause a little bit of pain and discomfort, or it can be very uncomfortable actually for some people, but it can also cause no symptoms whatsoever. So it's not, having a prolapse doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have loads and loads of problems, but again, it's just something that people don't necessarily get checked after having a baby, or particularly if you haven't had a baby, you might be having some symptoms like pain during intercourse is a flag for with pelvic floor health. Leaking is a flag. Feeling of kind of bulging or dragging around the vaginal area is also something to watch out for in terms of prolapse. And it just, all of these things, I think people just don't know. And when you have a baby, it sometimes is just kind of, you're spoken to as if, well, you've had a baby, what do you expect? And I just really want to spread the word that actually that isn't something that you should just, any signs of anything not feeling quite right down there, it really is worth looking into and getting help with, because if you don't, you can then, basically what happens when we go through menopause, our estrogen levels drop, and therefore we have a bit less support throughout our tissues. And then that's why a lot of older women have problems with their pelvic floor, because once they hit menopause and have less support, it all, things become more difficult. And over half of women over 50 have a prolapse. Wow. So it's, it's a large number. And like I say, that doesn't mean that half of women have massive problems, but they, having a prolapse is something that you need to be conscious of, so that you know how to use your body to make sure that it doesn't, cause you incontinence and things going forward.
And how do how do they fix it? Is there something you do to fix it, or is there something you have to live with? What
it depends. Next? It depends on the degree of it. So you have different degrees. Like you can have a stage. I think it's stage 1, 2, and 3. I'm not entirely sure if there might be a 4 as well. But basically, if you're stage 1, you can fix it. I say fix. You can help it with pelvic floor exercises and potentially reverse it. Once it gets further, so like if things are actually, stage 1 is when it's sort of dropping down, but nothing's actually bulging out. And then as you go further through along the stages, then it becomes more and more severe. And some people actually have, things dropping out of the vagina, in which case then you can have surgery. But what I'm really, really passionate about explaining to people is that it's like being aware of things before you get to the point of needing surgery. So it would be fairly unusual, I believe, to go from having no issues whatsoever to having a stage 4 prolapse. You would, it usually is something that gets worse over time. And I've had clients with 20-year-old kids who've just started working with me as part of their, the kids have just gone to university and they just want to do something for themselves. And then once we start talking, they realise that the fact that they're leaking every day isn't normal. And they've been putting up with that for 20 years.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And then like one lady in particular that I'm thinking of, like she worked with me. I sent her off to a pelvic health physio, and having had 20 years of leaking, she then wasn't leaking anymore after, 6 months of work between me and the physio. And that again, like things unfortunately with this kind of stuff, it tends to only get worse if you don't do anything about it. Like it's not generally something that just improves without any help, particularly I mean, not if you've got a week-old baby, then not necessarily, but once your baby is of a certain age, unless if you're not doing something to help your body, then you are setting yourself up for long-term problems.
Yeah. And actually, you've mentioned a pelvic floor physio a few times. What do they do, and like what kind of exercises or what kind of things are they helping you with?
So what they'll do is they'll check you internally, and like I said, like check for any tension. Maybe if people have had scarring from births, and if you have a cesarean as well, they can check the cesarean scar and make sure that there's adhesions from the scar aren't preventing your abdominal muscles from working properly. They can check your abdominals for separation, because your pelvic floor and your abdominals really work together. I was talking about the core earlier, and you've got this kind of canister through your center where the pressure has to go somewhere almost. So when you're creating pressure in your body, you need to be making sure that you're finding ways to support it. And sometimes that bears down into the pelvic floor, sometimes it pushes out into the abdominals, and we want to be making sure that pressure is spread throughout the whole torso. So a pelvic health physio will work, help make sure that you're breathing correctly, give you feedback on exactly what's going on in your pelvic floor. So for some people, it's all about the fact that it needs to be strengthened. For some people, it's all about the fact that it needs to be released before you can then start making it work effectively. And I think it would depend a little bit on who you're working with. Like some pelvic health physios will just focus on that lift and squeeze type exercise. I would recommend trying to find a physio who looks at it as a bit more of a holistic issue. So the lift and squeeze exercises can be really, really helpful, but they're like a piece of the puzzle of your pelvic floor health. You need to look at your pelvic floor is part of your whole body as a system. So for example, I was talking earlier about how if you're always slouching, that can cause you to be bearing down in your pelvic floor. Looking at your alignment and looking at where your pelvis stacks over your feet, where your rib cage stacks over your pelvis, and all of those things, like really it should be looked at as how you're using your whole body, because how you're using your body will impact how your pelvic floor is functioning.
Wow, my goodness, I literally just had no idea about any of this. The only thing I've ever seen, so I was talking to my friend about this the other day because I knew this interview was coming up, and I was like, okay, I've got this podcast, we're talking about pelvic floor health, and I was like, what kind of questions should I ask? And then we discussed it and we realised that we knew what Kegels were because she actually said it. She had a really specific reference. So she remembers picking up a Take a Break magazine when she was younger, reading what they were, and then that was everything she knew. And I was like, yeah, I think I learnt about Kegels from a magazine, and that's it. We know nothing else about any of it because we, like you said, never taught about it or anything. So this is really blowing my mind. So you talked about like what the pelvic floor is and what it does in terms of like, you know, that keeping, I mean, it's doing a lot of stuff. It's keeping us upright. It's doing everything. But then what are kind of the benefits of having your pelvic floor in good condition? And like what kind of things happen when it isn't?
I mean, the most important one is your continence, I guess, because, you know, that is obviously such a huge thing for people that to lose your continence can really change your life. I would also say, like, if for women, if you're planning on having a baby, it can impact your birth. So if your pelvic floor holds a lot of tension, for example, it can be harder for the baby to come through. But then just like with any muscle, I would just say that it's, you know, we want our bodies to be balanced and to be working in the best possible way. So it's just important that we get up, you know, I don't know if you've seen like the thing of sitting is the new smoking, where and sitting has a big impact on your pelvic, you know, doing too much sitting has a big impact on your pelvic floor health. And it's just, if your pelvic floor isn't supporting you properly, then your core isn't supporting you properly. When your core is functioning well, then it just supports your whole body as a system and, you know, allows you to do what you want to be doing, I guess, you know, particularly if you're wanting to exercise, if you're wanting to, I mean, and, you know, hopefully most people do want to move their bodies. Your pelvic floor is going to support you through all of that.
Yeah. And I'm guessing as well, this also has an effect on, you know, sex and things and that kind of sexual
definitely.
confidence and what that can do to your confidence, your self-esteem and your mental health too.
Yeah, and this isn't something that I specialise in. It's not, you know, I wouldn't tend to have clients coming and specifically talking about that in a lot of detail. However, like what I think I've already said this, but it is a red flag. If you find sex painful, it really is worth looking into why that might be, because you know there's different conditions that that mean that your pelvic floor is over tight. And like I say, there is loads that can be done. Like it's not working with that kind of function isn't my speciality, but loads of the exercises that I do for pre and postnatal women and women who are experiencing incontinence because of tension in their pelvic floor would be appropriate for anybody who's having those kind of issues. And so you know, if you can go and see a pelvic health physio, it really is worth looking into. And people do find it a bit embarrassing, but I work quite closely with a physio that's local to me, and she always kind of just, she's so lovely. And I think anyone who works in that kind of thing is always going to be someone who really wants to help people. And she is just like, I see this every day. Like it feels like a really big deal for you to come in and, you know, get somebody to check your vagina, but actually it's just part of her day-to-day job, and for her it's completely normal. She doesn't feel any weirdness around it. And you know, it's just like when people first have a baby and it kind of feels a bit like, oh god, they're gonna, you know, the first smear test or whatever it is can feel a bit weird for you, but it's just part of, you know, someone who specialises in that day to day, and it doesn't need to be embarrassing.
Yeah, we really need to normalise talking about vaginas, talking about our vaginal health, talking about like our gynecological health, talking about pelvic floor, because then less people would be embarrassed about it, and therefore more people would get help. And it's so sad that people would feel embarrassed about it, because there are so many people that this affects as well.
Yeah.
And if we were all talking about it, then we could start sharing tips and talking, you know, kind of recommending people to help people as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the big problems, is that because people don't want to talk about it, they don't necessarily find out how much help there is available. And there is just so much help out there. And what does happen a lot, I think, and I mean, I'm not, this is just based on my thoughts as opposed to any evidence that I've seen, but I would I would guess that because so many people don't want to talk about it, because people are so badly informed about what are red flags and things that, you know, you should be looking into, they don't get help until they're at the point where it is a huge problem. Whereas if they went and, you know, like if you're 25, have never had a baby, but find sex really painful, but are embarrassed by that, and then don't, you know, because I don't think when I was 25, it would have occurred to me to go and see a GP about something like that, because I would have just felt like, but actually if you do, it can, you know, you can then get referred and get to see somebody who specialises in that and can help you.
And would you say then, so for everyone that's, like, obviously for women we have to stay on top of it anyway, and we need to start talking about it so we can start making sure that we can maintain our pelvic floor health, but would you say for every person having a baby, they should absolutely go and speak to someone straight after they've had that baby or during?
Ideally, I mean, it's financially is the problem, because you won't get that on the NHS. Like if you have a baby and you don't have a specific pelvic floor issue, they won't just refer you to see somebody, because they just don't, that's not a provision as far as I'm aware. I mean, I could be wrong, I would love to be wrong about that, but I would say unless you've got, you know, unless you are leaking, unless you've got, you know, signs of a prolapse and so on, but it's the pelvic health physios near where I live, it costs maybe about £50-60 to go and see them, and even if you only went once, and I know that is a lot of money, but even if you only went once, just to get some kind of guidance about exactly what's happening, and, you know, understand, because it's such a, there's loads of general advice that you can get, but actually ideally you want to have that really specific advice for you, because it's quite hard to know whether you're tight or whether you're not, or, you know, like it's hard to know exactly what your body needs without getting that specific help.
And how many kind of, like, when people go to physios, etc., how many sessions do they have? Is it kind of how long is a piece of string, or is it just...
I think it varies hugely. A lot of people that I work with will only go once or twice, because they are working with me and I can kind of help them alongside, and it's just to sort of find out exactly what's going on. But I think if you weren't doing something already, then and it would just depend what exactly was happening. Like you might, if there wasn't anything major going on, I would say that it usually takes sort of 3 to 6 months to see results in terms of changing things in your pelvic floor. So it's not necessarily something that you'll go to once a week. Although, I mean, again, because it's not it's not what I do, I couldn't tell you exactly. But generally, the people that I work with tend to go once and then a few months later go back. But I think it does depend what's happening.
Okay. Awesome. So how do we take care of our pelvic floor health, and when should we start, like, on that journey as well? Should it be like, okay, we're at a certain age now, we should start thinking about it, or is it something that we should teach in school and girls should be doing throughout their life?
I think having that awareness throughout your whole life would be great, like, because there's no harm in it. And like I said at the beginning, it's not about, you know, changing everything that you do, but it's just about having a level of understanding about what's happening in your pelvic floor. So basically what you want to watch out for, and this is like particularly if you've had a baby or have got any signs that your pelvic floor might not be working in the perfect way, you want to be watching out for creating too much intra-abdominal pressure, which is where your abdominals will bulge out and you might not necessarily feel it, but your pelvic floor will bear down. So it's kind of generally accepted that, you know, sneezing, laughing, coughing, jumping are things where mums might have a bit of leaking. That you shouldn't be leaking. Even if you've had 5 babies, you want to be getting yourself to a place where your pelvic floor is able to support you, whatever you're doing. But that awareness of the intra-abdominal pressure is really important. So when you breathe in and out, your pelvic floor moves. So as you inhale, your pelvic floor moves down, and as you exhale, it lifts back up again.
Yeah.
If you're using the whole of your torso, like the whole of that canister that I talked about earlier, with the pelvic floor at the bottom and the diaphragm at the top, you're creating a much more even sense of pressure throughout your body. But some people, for example's ribs don't really move at all when they breathe, and they just breathe down into the belly, which then is going to cause more pressure into the pelvic floor and the abdominal muscles. So one of the first things to be conscious of is how you breathe, and trying to make sure that you're breathing through that whole torso. Because again, like when you're 23 with no kids, you may not, it's not that you're necessarily particularly likely to get pelvic floor dysfunction, but if you're breathing well, it's just good for your body anyway. Like your core is going to function better. So just having that awareness is not about scaring people that at 23 they need to be freaking out about their pelvic floor, because they don't. But knowing that, looking at how you're breathing and just looking at the mobility throughout your body. So again, like your pelvic floor functions as part of you as a whole. So like if your shoulders are really, really tight and your rib cage is really, really tight, and therefore your breathing is a little bit dysfunctional, it's just worth being aware of that. So making sure that you're moving enough, that you're, just every day making sure that your body does some rotation. Sometimes, if we're stuck in front of Zoom all day, like a lot of us are at the moment, it can literally be that you're sitting and your body just doesn't shift. But just making sure that you're getting some rotation through your ribs, that you're standing every so often, that you're moving your body is really important in terms of your pelvic floor health. And then again, looking at your posture from that same perspective. So when you're sinking down constantly, you put pressure into your pelvic floor. Everything functions much better within our core when it's all stacked in alignment. So you want your pelvis to line up over your ankles, your rib cage to line up over your pelvis, and your head to line up over your rib cage. And that will allow, like, just getting everything into those positions, rather than slumping, standing with your pelvis swinging forwards in front of your hips, which is really common. Can that can make the difference between your pelvic floor functioning well and not. And again, that's where, although Kegels are, it's not that they're not, it's not they should be just thrown out the window, but you could be doing all the Kegels in the world, but if you're then standing up and standing in a way that doesn't allow your pelvic floor to function properly, it just doesn't quite, it just becomes all a bit imbalanced and doesn't work. It doesn't mean that your pelvic floor is working as it should be just because you're doing some Kegels every day.
Okay, so that's, as everything you've said there, as you said it, I don't know if you see me like on Zoom, I'm shifting around because I'm like, okay, am I breathing properly? And I'm like literally like, now you've mentioned posture, and like every now and again I'm like shifting my posture. It's made me really aware, and like I was really listening to my own breathing, then thinking, do I? And trying to feel it. It's like, do I breathe like with my whole chest or not? This is really interesting, and there are so many things that I've just, again, because I've never learned about this before, they're all kind of like key things that I suppose you should focus on just generally with health and everything, but we still aren't told or talked to about this. So you actually run online courses, because I feel definitely I need to sign up for a course. Now I'm really aware. I want to make sure I'm standing correctly. I want to make sure I'm looking after my pelvic floor. So you have a course, you have a few courses, but we're going to talk about, the first one we're going to talk about is core matters. What do you kind of teach on that course? What kind of thing can people expect when they sign up?
So it's all about pelvic floor health, and it's all about understanding your pelvic floor. So it does involve a lot of exercises, but it's not just kind of, an exercise program. It's very much about education and understanding exactly what's going on in your body. And I'm finding it, I mean, you can see me, but with people listening, I'm finding it quite hard not to show everything, because it's quite, I think it's quite a visual subject. And so just kind of going through a lot of the stuff that we've already talked about, but in a bit more detail and, with visuals to really help you to understand it all. And then moving on to exercises that go through things that can help to release your pelvic floor, things that help to improve your posture, to improve your breath, to improve your alignment. there's loads of pre-recorded content, but I struggle. I avoided going online for years, even though I kept being told that, you know, online is the way forward with fitness, because I just really believe in, when you're teaching people about their bodies, it's really, really important for them to get some feedback on that. Like I can't quite get my head around trying to teach someone about all this stuff and not having any contact with them, because that to me just isn't how it all works. So I also include live coaching calls as part of the program. And those are kind of part education, part exercises, and then time to ask questions and to go through specific things that people might be finding difficult within the pre-recorded content. There's also within it pre-recorded calls with women's health physio, women's health osteopath, nutritionists, life coaches, and, you know, just people, like, for example, when the first time I did this course and ran it live, I found that some people were just massively invested, and some people found it really hard to work out, you know, how to fit it into their lives, how to be accountable. So like we've got a talk from a life coach about how to, you know, just with some tips for how to make it work in your life, as opposed to just kind of giving you the content and saying go away and do it, because that's much easier said than done. And then we also talk about nutrition, and, you know, different things that you can do just to support your body nutritionally, because not in terms of weight loss or anything like that, but to make sure that your body is functioning at its best. So that's there's really quite a lot in there.
There's lots in there. And how long does it last? Like, I know obviously it's pre-recorded, but is it just that you can watch it as quickly as you want, or is there like a certain period of time you'd recommend doing it?
The way that I'm going to do it, so I'm running it again in January, and the way that I'm going to do it is over 8 weeks. So there's going to be every other week every other week a live call. So there'll be 4 live calls within the 8 weeks, and then it varies for everybody in terms of what I would recommend for them to how long they take over it, because some people, you know, the first module is about releasing and, you know, making sure that there's not too much tension around your body. Some people don't really need that so much, and some people might actually need to spend the whole 8 weeks focusing on that before they move on to other stuff. So I don't really like to give people too much of a time frame that they need to stick to. But I'd say for the majority of people, 8 weeks is quite a good amount of time to kind of move from the education through to the release work, through to the building strength, and then making it functional as well, because that's a really important part of it. And again, that's where just doing pelvic floor exercises doesn't necessarily give you everything that you need, because you need to be able to incorporate it in your day-to-day life. And actually, sorry, I know I do talk a lot, but something that I really want to say
so interesting.
is that I was talking about the breathing before, and how you how your breath and your pelvic floor work together. So when you exhale, your pelvic floor naturally lifts. So what we do a lot in the classes is teach how to use your exhale as you move. So for example, when you're doing a squat, you know, a lot of people would just squat up and down without thinking about what they're doing with their breathing. But if you inhale as you come down in a squat and you exhale as you push up, it then makes it a pelvic floor exercise. And it's just, you know, there's like little basic things like that you can just add in, because when you squat down, your pelvic floor naturally releases, and it releases as you inhale, and when you push up, it naturally contracts, and it contracts as you exhale. So you're then kind of giving yourself double bubble as you do it. And so things like that, and, you know, working out how, you know, I say to my new mums, when you pick your baby up, do it as you exhale, because then that will just give your pelvic floor that little bit of extra support.
That's really interesting to know, because then when I've had PTs, they've just told me to breathe like that when I'm doing it for the exercise. I'm like, actually now I know that it's got a double purpose. When I'm working out by myself, I'll make sure I follow that as well, because I think when you've got a PT, they kind of tell you what to do. If you're by yourself, you'll just do it any old way, won't you? And we talked a few times actually about exercise, and you also have Centred Mums in Motion, and you kind of, I know that you want women to like reassess their approach to exercise. So if you have for example, like a really strong core and you work out a lot, are you less likely to have pelvic floor issues, or does your level of fitness not matter at all?
I think it depends. I think that's a really good question, and I'd love to know what a pelvic health physio's answer would be to that. I would say that it's not just about strength. So say, for example, you could have a really strong pelvic floor, but then, in fact, it's not about strength, it's about a function. So you don't just want a strong pelvic floor, you want a pelvic floor that is able to release and able to contract as you need it to day to day. So if you've done more exercise, then yes, there is a chance that your pelvic floor is functioning well. But it can also be, like, one thing that's quite common in dancers is that because they spend their whole lives kind of lifting up, and I used to be a dancer, so I sort of know quite a bit about it, because they spend so much time lifting up, they then sort of hold quite a lot of tension in their pelvic floor. So even though they're strong as a unit, you know, their whole body is strong, it doesn't necessarily mean that their pelvic floor function is completely as we want it to be. So I think it's a huge question that I don't really know the answer to. But I guess what the point is, that you want to be making sure that you've got balance in your body. You know, often there's a real focus on, you know, we need to be strong, but actually, yes, you need strength to do certain things, but you can't strengthen muscles that are over tight. So it's about having movement and give throughout your body, and making sure that everything is balanced and functioning well, as opposed to just worrying about it being strong.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's really interesting. Yeah, that does make sense. And so, like, with women reassessing their approach to exercise, how do you think I'm going to start the question again. Sorry, Abby, record that, scrap that one. With women, with your beliefs about women reassessing their approach to exercise, what do you mean by that? And then is your course Centred Mums in Motion about that?
So when I want women to reassess how they look at exercise, because I think that we live in a society where strength and drive and, you know, the sort of typical, what is sometimes seen as typical male characteristics are seen as like the best things, you know. So it's like, if you're not lifting the heaviest weight, then that's not, as, you know, you're always striving to do more and more and push your body and push your body and push your body. But actually, that's not how our bodies were designed to work. And for women, you know, we are supposed to have a certain amount of softness in our body to get, you know, you hear about teenagers who over exercise and then don't start their periods because their bodies are imbalanced, and we need a certain amount of fat in our body to allow our hormones to work as they should be working. So I just want to encourage women to not get caught up in the way that society tells us that we need to be super skinny and, you know, have six packs and all of that kind of thing, because that's not how our bodies were designed to be. And when it comes to abdominal separation in pregnancy, I tend to find that the women who have the most problems with abdominal separation are the people who were super strong and had the six pack before, because then their bodies don't want to stretch and open in the way that they are designed to do when they're pregnant. And that is a generalization. That's not to say that that's always the case. But basically, I just want to encourage women to listen to their bodies, I guess, and to do what feels good. Like, for me, exercise should be about making yourself feel good rather than punishing yourself. So if you're going and if you're doing like really, really hardcore exercise and it makes you feel great and it makes you feel like full of energy and, you know, ready to do more and buzzing, then that's great. And I'm not trying to suggest that people shouldn't do that. But I'm also saying that if you're doing really hardcore exercise and it doesn't make you feel great and it makes you feel depleted and you're wetting yourself as you do it, which makes you feel depressed, and you're completely exhausted because you're doing all of those things, that is that really serving you, and what are you doing it for?
Yeah.
And I would kind of argue that if you're having those experiences where exercise doesn't make you feel great, then you're probably not doing it for yourself, and that's kind of it's a bit of a huge issue. And I'm certainly not an expert in all of those ins and outs of society and all of, but that's kind of my take on it. And so when it comes to Centred Mums in Motion, that is exactly what it is all about, is teaching people about their bodies, about how their bodies work, about what is serving you and what potentially isn't, and then working out, like, the reason that I created that program is because I have so many mums who are really keen to get back into running and get back into doing their HIIT workouts and all of those things, which are brilliant things to do for your body, as long as it's serving you. So if you're going for a run and you're leaking the whole time, then that is a red flag that your pelvic floor isn't able to support you. So I created Centred Mums in Motion to basically take people from scratch, like through all of the basic pelvic floor stuff, all the way up to doing squats and jumps at the end, and loads of lunges and stuff that gets you ready for doing the kind of exercise that a lot of women do want to do, and does make them feel good, but will maybe only make them feel good if they've done the build up, because there's a massive gap between having a baby, doing your pelvic floor exercises and going for a run. And that's what, like, nobody tells you that. No, you kind of go to your GP check at 6 weeks postnatal or 8 weeks postnatal, and they say, okay, you're now cleared to exercise. And then someone who's always run their whole life goes, oh, okay, great, I'm going to go for a run then. And that's just not a healthy way to be. Like, you need to do your rehab program. You need to start from the inside, like, you know, strengthen your pelvic floor, get your core functioning properly, transfer that into squats and lunges and, you know, stuff that is getting you ready to run. And then once you're ready, and there's a brilliant study from some pelvic health physios called the Return to Running Guidelines, which is all about getting women back into running postnatally. But actually I was reading it the other day and I was thinking that it should just be running guidelines, like, because a lot of the things that we've talked about that are possible issues for people in terms of their pelvic floor aren't just about postnatal, and that is what, and also the fact that sometimes people think that once they're 6 months postnatal, they're not postnatal anymore. But one of my big sayings is once postnatal, always postnatal, because until you've done that core rehab and until you've really got yourself into a place where you can support your body, you're still a postnatal body, even if your baby's 20.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Well, I mean, it's been so great to learn about all of this. And I'm genuinely really interested in signing up for the course and finding out more, just to kind of stay on top of it. Just, for myself, it's like, I don't know if I'm going to have kids, but just generally, I think it's just something you've given us so many important points about the fact that it's not just looking after your pelvic floor. It's not just about if you're having babies vaginally. It's just taking care of yourself as a woman and being aware of your body, listening to your body. These are all things that we need to know, and all things that we need to learn, and all things that we need to really, I suppose, actively do. Where can we find you online? Where do you want to be found online? And where can people sign up for your courses?
So the best place to find me is on my website, which is also where you can sign up for the courses. They're not open yet because I'm starting the next one in January. So you can just add yourself to a waiting list, and then I'll let you know when it's booking. And then I'm also on Instagram at Centred Mums Pilates. And Instagram's a really great place to follow me because it's all free content. Like, a lot of the stuff that's within my programs, I do post in, here and there on Instagram. So if you're not looking to fully invest in buying a program, it's definitely worth just having some knowledge and understanding through all the free stuff that's available. There is also a free download actually on my website about pelvic floor health, and that's worth having a look at as well if you're interested in it all. And yeah, I think those are my main hangouts. But I am really happy. Like, hopefully you can tell that I'm really, really passionate about all of this stuff, and I am really happy for people to contact me with questions, and don't be a stranger. I'm here to help if I can.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you have the rest of your day is amazing.
You too. Thank you for having me. It's been lovely to chat.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!